That was, of course, The Killers and When We Were Young. I remember the days when we were young indeed. Okay, next up, I'm delighted to say we have our special guest on the phone, Mr. Mark Beaumont. He is the current world record holder, and in my opinion, it's unlikely to be beaten, of cycling around the world in 78 days, 18,000 miles, 78 days on a bike. Other endurance sports are in his repertoire as well. I'm sure we'll talk to that in a minute. And in general, all-round nice guy. So good afternoon to you, Mark. How are you doing?
Good afternoon.
So, first and foremost, just going to take you back to the very start. How did you get into cycling in the first place?
Well, I was growing up in rural Scotland, which obviously deserves some exploring. And I guess I had an odd start so far as I didn't go to school until I was 12. So I spent most of my time outside, riding ponies on the farm or skiing up at Glen Shee or riding my bicycle. So, being in the outdoors was kind of second nature. And I first had the thought to go on a journey when I was about 11, turning 12, and that ended up being from Dundee to Oban. So I ended up riding into sort of the harbour at Oban after 3 days, and it wasn't just the sport of it. It was the planning of it, the fundraising, the getting to tell my story afterwards. I loved that whole process. So I never really went down the path of being a racer. I always wanted to just get into big expeditions and do journeys.
Yeah, Dundee to Oban as a 12-year-old, that's quite a feat in itself. I mean, it's definitely the platform you built on as you got older.
Yeah, that was a good 23, 24 years ago now. So you can reverse engineer the last 2 decades and it all looks pretty chronological. It all looks pretty obvious steps from one ambition to the next, not just in terms of the physicality, but just the comfort zone to even think these things might be possible. But the truth of the matter is, like any career, I couldn't, when I was a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old, taking on these bigger and bigger trips, ever imagine it would end up where it has. All you can see is the horizon in front of you, and that's exactly what I did. So from Land's End to John O'Groats to the length of Italy, up through Scandinavia, the trips got bigger and bigger until I was, 22, graduating from university in Glasgow with a perfectly useful economics degree and thinking, can I cycle around the world? So it was sort of not quite baby steps, but it definitely it grew quite naturally, as opposed to me waking up one day and thinking, hey, I can cycle around the world.
Yeah, that is definitely it. You have. But when you did go to cycle around the world, like you're saying, that the planning, the first time you did it was 194 days, am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so the first time was completely unsupported. I was out there on my own, whereas what happened quite recently was quite the opposite. It was quite a team effort.
Yeah, so just taking you back, when you did it the first time, it was 194 days, and then I do remember you saying that after you did it, obviously very proud and a heck of an achievement. Let's not take anything away from that one. But I remember you saying that people shaved a little bit off here and there, down to 160 days or something like that, and eventually got down to 123 days. Is that what inspired you to do it again?
Yeah, I watched with awe and with interest over the decade. So I first set the record in 2006, 2007, and it was a big BBC documentary series. It created a huge amount of press, and it really got people interested in that record. So it went from very few people having ever done it to many people every year going for it, which I was very proud of. So it was a real catalyst to get people pedaling around the planet against the clock.
Yes,
and I definitely watched, as I say, with interest to see how that was bettered time and time again. It went from sort of full touring, carrying all your kit and your cook stove and your tent, to people going really ultra light, carrying minimal kit, bike packing, and then taking greater and greater degrees of support. So it was purely about riding your bike rather than where you're going to camp every night and where's your next meal. So as it sort of veered towards being a supported record, I definitely thought, well, there's another whole way to do this.
Yes.
If it's purely about performance and not about adventure, what's the next level you could take this to? And it was about 3 years ago that I sort of sat down with my family and I said, I want to have another crack. I think we could take the record that stood, which was held by Andrew Nicholson, an Olympian, a New Zealander, at 123 days. And I thought, well, could we possibly go under 100? And then it was only during the planning and the sort of the years that built up to it that we started to speculate sub 80, and that became the big dream. Around the world in 80 days, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the old Willy Fogg thing, isn't it? But
Yeah,
going back, sorry, just to what you're saying about the other guys who were doing the record as well. Now, is there an actual set route, or I mean, you're talking about planning your route. I know you've got to do opposite points on the globe, but is there a set route that everyone follows in general?
No, it's becoming a bit standardised now. So Jenny Graham, who came home quite recently from and broke the female record. So I'm proud to say that both the male and female circumnavigation world record are held by Scots right now.
Fantastic.
We're a small nation, but we're good at this stuff.
Yes.
And so Jenny followed pretty much exactly my route. I think there's more and more standardisation with it as people realise that you want the flattest route, the best road quality, the easiest border crossings. There's set criteria, but you've got lots of options, some which are obviously faster than others. So I think as time goes on, whilst like the sailing boats, you can take whichever route you want, there is obviously a route which is kind of faster than the others. That's happening as it becomes more and more professional.
Right, and folk are getting wise to it, seeing what you've done, maybe looking at what you've done and trying to tweak it slightly as well, and not just by the route, but also everything else that you're saying. You brought a team along with you this time with obviously spare bike parts and such. How many bikes did you use in total?
So one of the rules is you've got to use the same bike, but you can kind of read that as the same sort of bike. It's to stop you using time trial bikes across the flats and then road racing bikes over the hills. So, but it's kind of triggers broom, isn't it? Because of course, on a race going 18,000 miles, you get through many tires, many chains, many parts. So we had spares for everything, but essentially it was the same bike, if that makes any sense.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Same setup.
Yeah. One of the things I seen was you had to actually put it in the box to fly ahead to Australia, so that you cycled the last bit on a different setup. Well, same bike, different setup as you say, but only so that for the logistics of getting the bike there first, so that you could come off the plane and literally jump back on it.
Exactly. I mean, by the time the rest of my was out of customs and the spare bike was being built up, I was already miles down the road. Of course, those details really matter. Once you're looking at every minute and I was riding 16 hours a day. Every day started at 3:30 in the morning. Something I stressed with my team is if we lost 5 minutes every time I was off the bike, that would add over a day to the world record. So,
wow.
The details matter. They add up.
Yeah, you did go into it in some minute detail. Now, one of the things that really struck me, just for perspective, was when you talked about, at the very start, you started in Paris and you headed east, and you said you were travelling roughly 240 miles a day on average, and on day number 8, you were in Moscow.
Yes. Day 8, I was in Moscow. We had a flying start through Europe. We'd cleared Europe at the pace of basically a country a day, six countries, 6 days, and then day 8 through Moscow, and that was all going brilliantly. And then day 9 started at 5:30 in the morning, in the dark, in the rain, and I crashed, really hard over the front of the bike, took the fall on my face and my outstretched left arm. So the result was some very wobbly teeth, and my canine tooth was sort of cracked in two, was broken, and then my radio head, so that's the small bone in your elbow, had fractured. So I had a crack in the elbow as well. And that the roads in Russia are pretty constantly rough, and I don't need to describe what it's like trying to get 9,000 calories in it every day through broken teeth and holding the handlebars of your bike with a fracture in your elbow. I mean, there was a lot of pain management through the rest of Russia, Mongolia, and China.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. That was my next question, actually, when you're talking about the calories there, because even though you're cycling for 4 hours at a time, taking a break for half hour, 4 hours break, 4 hours, half hour break. So like you say, a total of 16 hours. So am I right in saying you went to bed roughly about 9:30 by the time you got off the bike and got up again at 3:30 in the morning?
So off the bike, 9:30, 9:45. By the time you've done some massage recovery, get your food in, probably lights out at 10:30. 45 minutes is probably as quick as we ever got it down to with all the admin that doesn't it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You get 5 hours sleep, alarm goes off at 3:30, back on the bike at 4. So
and repeat for 78 days, basically.
Yeah, for 2.5 months, absolutely. Yeah.
It's impressive, it really is. Now, calories intake, just because obviously you're burning so many, you've got to take in a lot. But if you had a big meal during one of these half-hour stops, you always get that, but it's like if you had a big Sunday meal, you sit in front of the coal fire and you want to fall asleep. So you were doing a more steady intake as you were cycling, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely focus on getting as many calories as I could in on the bike, because I had a lot of time. I had 16 hours pedaling along, and you sort of drip feed the calories as much as you can. But of course, when I got off the bike, I would look forward to. It's interesting because of course I needed 9,000 calories for it to be sustainable, which is a mountain of food. But interestingly, food's also massively important for psychology. You look forward to a coffee or a warm a warm meal off the bike as opposed to another wrap or another sports bar or another gel or something handed to you on the bike. So it's amazing how powerful food is just as a target to get through those 4-hour blocks. But it's hard to keep that amount of food down. Your stomach is often, people think your legs are going to give up, but your muscles are incredibly resilient, and it's often your gut that gives up on these big endurance events. I mean, ask anyone who's run a marathon or done a big sportif or a multi-day ride, and it's often your tummy. So learning how to fuel effectively through a challenge like this was a real problem because it's such a battle of attrition. I mean, you're sleep deprived for 2.5 months, and you're trying to ultimately not fade away to nothing. It'd be fine if you were doing it over a week, but 2.5 months is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's endurance both ways, in days, and the days run into the next day, and so on. So then, once you got further across past Russia and Mongolia and such like, obviously you went. What was the next part of the trip after that?
So Southern Hemisphere, across Australia, up to New Zealand. So that was winter.
Yes.
And, a lot of night riding, a lot colder, a lot windier. That stretch across the outback and then up New Zealand was particularly gritty. New Zealand was, the first 6 hours were in darkness. It was often sub-zero. So, tough old riding. Quite a relief to land back in Anchorage. That was sort of leg 3 through North America. So we had a 5,500 mile race through to Halifax, so basically through Canada.
Yeah.
But that was probably psychologically the hardest part. I was 2 months in, real Groundhog Day, just trying to get through the weeks, and some really surprising weather for what was the summer. We had big forest fires ripping through North Dakota, and the amount of storms ripping up through the Midwest meant that we were getting huge headwinds. We're caught in these big sort of smoke storms, and it was pretty slow riding. I got out the Rockies thinking I would have my fastest, flattest riding on the entire world, and in actual fact, I struggled to hit 200 miles a day going through the outback, which was my flattest part of the world. So psychologically, I found that pretty tough. I mean, there was days as I came up through the Great Lakes and headed toward the East Coast in Canada where, I'd ridden 250 miles and I got off the bike and struggled to remember it. I was sort of riding in autopilot. And I was really, really worried that I was, still staying safe on the bike, and I was, cognitively switched on. It's important, that safety comes first.
Of course.
There's no reference point for this. Nobody's done anything like it.
And obviously the moral support from your team as well. But you met some characters along the way as well. I think you said you met somebody doing something similar on a unicycle in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, so a fellow Brit. It was Ed Pratt. So Ed spent 3.5 years out there riding a unicycle around the world, one wheel, 29-inch penny farthing wheel with his luggage slung over the top. Just incredible. He left school as an 18-year-old, came back in his early 20s as a young man, and what an education, what a journey. So I passed him in the middle of the outback, and we rode together for about 20 minutes. Yeah,
it's total respect for the guys that do these kind of things as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, your trip's incredible, but 3 years on a unicycle, that's tough going as well, to say the least.
Absolutely. And it was nice actually last year when he finished, his final leg was from Edinburgh back down to his home in Somerset. So I met him off the plane in Edinburgh, and he stayed at mine for a couple of days.
Perfect.
And I rode out with him to see him on his way for his final leg. So he was on his unicycle, I was on my penny farthing, and we made quite a sight leaving Edinburgh, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I bet you. So just going back to the world record then, when you were in America going across, I remember you telling me you met a character or two going across there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because the belief in this project grew and grew. You could see people were just so excited, and the fan base was, the press and the public wanting to come out on the roadside.
Yes.
And so that actually became a bit of a challenge because so many people were wanting to come out and be a part of it, and I was trying to keep my focus on just getting through the hard miles. No, we had a young lad decide to come out mid-morning, and the best way to support him was to streak. He literally took his boots off and ran down the roadside. That was an unlikely but amusing way of supporting me.
Each to their own. Yep.
We had a local minister, an evangelical minister, come out and read me a big prayer on my bicycle as I pedalled along to wish me well. I mean, we had hundreds of people wanting to be a part of it. Do you know what the main theme through North America was? Was people wanting to home cooking, cakes, scones, buns, anything they could think of. So I was well fed through North America as people took it upon themselves to come out with basically home baking every single day. I think I posted when I was in Alaska that somebody had done that, and through social media they just took it as a task to make sure that I was well fed with home baking all the way across North America.
But it's great because that tells you how far and wide it spread, with folk realising that you were coming through their town. They were prepared for it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, places I've never been to before, and suddenly I turned up and there was tens of people waiting for me on their bicycles wanting to be a part of the journey. I mean, that was incredible. I have to say it was a real distraction as well, and it was hard to be grateful but ultimately be struggling at the same time when people would turn out, be super excited, want to have a Q&A and ride along with you, and you're 14 hours into your day hurting in the hurt locker, really struggling to get through. It's hard to be
focused,
to be the ambassador, to be the the nice guy on the bike, chatting away as if you're on a Sunday ride, but ultimately, in the hurt locker.
Yeah, not just a 14-hour day. Obviously, at that point, you were, I'm trying to think of now, off the top of my head, 50-odd days into it by the time you were in America, of course. So.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's more of a reflection on me than them. I was flattered and loved the support, but I struggled to deal with it because there was so much attention at the time when I was struggling the most.
And then after America, you flew back to Europe and landed in, was it Spain,
Lisbon.
Portugal?
Lisbon.
Lisbon, yep. So
Portugal. So final 5 days through Madrid, over the Pyrenees, and back up to Paris.
And I remember you saying that once you landed in Lisbon, because the logistical side of it with planes, trains and automobiles was kind of out the way, it was all about cycling. Psychologically, you felt like the touching line was in distance, but it wasn't time to get complacent?
No, well, I think that was the case for everyone else. I mean, every second conversation, every second sentence was Paris. People, sponsors, friends, family, everyone jumping on the plane to be in Paris, and everyone wanting it to be over. I spoke to a journalist when I was just west of Madrid, and he said to me, "Look, Mark, I'm going to embargo this interview until you're at the finish, so why don't we chat like we're in Paris?" And I said, well, I could try and do that, but I've still got 1,000 miles to cycle. So there's a real risk when you build such momentum and such success in a project that people think it's over before it's over. And to give a real example of that, on day 75, coming back across the Pyrenees, I crashed really hard late at night, lost control of the bike into the oncoming traffic, and I was so lucky to get out of that unscathed. But my point is, if you mess up in any given second, then the whole race can be over. Yeah,
it's the old adage that you can't win a Formula One race in the first corner, but you can lose it, that kind of thing. Yeah, so
it's not over till it's over. So I found the last 5 days particularly tough because everyone else was seeing it as a victory lap, whereas I was still very much treating it as 4-hour blocks and just trying to get through.
Yeah, you had to stay focused. But when you did get back to Paris, what was the feeling like?
It was, extraordinary insofar as just an unspeakable relief to get off the bike, to see my wife and my 2 daughters and my family. That was absolutely wonderful. Absolutely loved it. But also probably the tiredest I've ever been in my life. Utterly finished. The bizarre thing is that everyone else is so excited for you. Everyone else was just pulling backflips for me, and I kind of felt like my emotions were slightly muted. I was sort of rabbits in the headlights, going, "Wow, is this it? Is this for real? Are we done now?" And the biggest emotion was definitely relief.
Yeah.
All the perspective on the world and the journey and everything built for 3 years took time. It took a real amount of time. It probably was sitting down a few months later and starting to write the book before I actually sort of zoomed out and saw the big picture. Because when you're at the finishing line, it's pretty full on. When the world cameras are pointing at you, and the emotions are a bit much.
Yeah, you had to stop, take a step back to gain perspective. Yeah, I totally get that. But what you were saying, also, obviously, you would sleep for Scotland by the time you'd finished, and rightly so. But is there not something about if you completely stop, it's bad for you as well? You need to kind of slow down and do some cycling just to slow the body down.
Yeah, I definitely had a few days off, but then ultimately, I'd been time trialing for 1,200 hours. I'd been on the bike. I hadn't walked for 2.5 months. So when I did a DEXA scan when I came home, which is a full body X-ray, it showed my bone density was slightly down because I'd not walked for 2.5 months. So Yeah, there was 3 months of training down, normalizing my fitness, getting in the swimming pool, doing low impact, walking the dog, just trying to do anything but, stay in that sort of time trial cycling position. And, gradually normalized my fitness. And, I think that was quite a good medicine as well psychologically to sort of come down from such a stress, such a trip, and just spending quality time with the family.
Yeah.
I mean, my focus through the last year is not. There's no point trying to stay in that sort of shape. It's so specific. I could happily ride 250 miles a day, but if you'd asked me to run 10, I would have really struggled. My legs and my back would have hurt. So I was, fit for a purpose, but it wasn't particularly useful for anything else in life. So I've been quite happy to take on different challenges and do different sporting things in the last year. But it was definitely a real process to come down after that.
It almost sounds bizarre just talking about readjusting to practice walking again, as daft as that sounds, but that's exactly what it was in some ways, I suppose.
Yeah,
so,
I hadn't walked for 2.5 months.
Yeah, so you came to Oban just a couple of months ago and you did a chat about this and put on a fantastic slideshow in the Corn Halls, and it was a great night, and hopefully next time you come I'll give you a wee shout a wee bit sooner. We can get a wee bit of promotion beforehand. So just want to touch on another couple of things you've done as well, though. The Americas trip, just quickly, from Alaska down to the southern tip of Argentina.
Yeah, that was today still my longest expedition. That was 9 months, and the mission there was to try and be the first person to climb the highest peaks in North and South America and pedal between them, in a climbing season. So it's Denali in Alaska and Aconcagua in Argentina. So they're the two biggest mountains, outside of the Himalayas, in terms of the highest peaks in the continents, and two pretty tricky climbs, especially when you sandwich them between an 8-month pedal from north to south. So
yeah, but that's exactly what I was going to ask, because when you're cycling fit, it doesn't mean you're running fit, and vice versa. So was it not really difficult getting off the bike to climb a mountain, and then once you came back down the mountain, getting back on the bike?
The second mountain, yes. I mean, the second mountain, because I'd been on the bike for 6 months at that point, I then had to climb to 7,000 meters. So putting a heavy pack on and climbing up. I mean, Aconcagua is basically a big scree slope. Up to about 5,500 meters, you can go in a pair of trainers because it's just scree.
Right.
It gets a bit trickier further up, but it's still not a super technical mountain. So yes, of course, my back and my legs slightly struggled with that transition. But I mean, I love that journey because, going around the world, you avoid the mountains at all costs because you're trying to go fast, whereas the Americas expedition was all about the mountains. It was about following the Rockies and the Andes top to toe down the length of the Cordillera. So in that sense, I absolutely loved that sort of change. And it was also not a record attempt, so there was the opportunity to slow down and meet people and film stories. And, you can still go on YouTube and see quite a lot of clips of the man who cycled the Americas. It was a project that I was really proud of.
Yeah, that's something I actually did over the last couple of days. Went back, I seen it a few years ago, obviously, but I went back and watched all 3 episodes over the last couple of days on YouTube. Look up, guys, the man who cycled the Americas. It's one of the things I took from it as well was that certain things you just can't plan for. Obviously, the weather, and there was a bit of trouble in Honduras. But one of the things that stuck out in my mind was when you were camping in Canada, and what you did was with your food, you had to put it up a tree.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been through that part of the world a few times now, through the Yukon and northern British Columbia. There's a lot of bears, so you got to be pretty careful when you're out there camped at night. Getting everything that smells, including food, toothpaste, you name it, putting it in a dry bag, slinging it up a tree, well away from your camp, and other simple processes like having bangers and simple ways to deter wild animals. I mean, it's interesting having filmed and travelled through places like that. I mean, the wildlife is normally pretty it's pretty scared of us, as opposed to the other way around. Of course, you're a bit scared the first time you camp out with grizzlies around you. But the only time I've become really close to bears is actually further north in the Arctic when I was rowing up there, and that was the polar bears, because they really aren't scared of people, and they're so unused to seeing humans that the wildlife up there just comes straight towards you, being inquisitive, as opposed to having any instinct or habit to run away. So no, it's always interesting when you're out in the wild dealing with the wildlife.
Yeah, I think it's just it's the level of detail you've had to think about of all the things we've discussed. Never mind bringing bangers and stuff for bears, and even when you went across there, it was over Christmas, and you even brought a wee bit of tinsel and stuff as well.
That was fun. That was a care package from Mum.
Yeah, that was lovely, and the Christmas cake as well.
I was sitting out there in the Atacama Desert, unwrapping some Christmas cake, which disappointingly I woke up the next morning and the ants were eating.
Yes, the ants got into your tent. of all the things to happen, I mean, you couldn't. Again, these are the things that you can't plan for, though, isn't it? So.
No, you laugh about them afterwards, but at the time it was quite upsetting.
Yeah. I can imagine my reaction if I was in your shoes at that point. So, a couple of quick things. And at the moment, I believe just recently you did a 24-hour cycle with some Oban cycling legends, Mr. Nick Charlton and Stephen Groom. Afternoon to you guys listening. Tell us about that. How did that go quickly?
Yeah, so that's the legendary Strathpuffer. So I've never really done much on the cross-country mountain bike side. So yeah, I thought I'd test myself in a different way, and into that amazing event up near Dingwall, Strathpeffer. So 24 hours, literally goes 10 a.m. on the Saturday morning, straight through the night till 10 a.m. on the Sunday morning. And 2 weekends ago, it was -5. It was incredibly gritty. It's 8 miles circuit, including some pretty gnarly single track and very icy sections. So I had my work cut out for me. Both Stephen and Nick, I think, did pretty well. I saw them out on the course. They had their little base camp just up the track from where we were, and it was good to see them out racing. They had their North Argyll Cycle Club banners out in force, so everyone could see who they were. I was riding with Alex Glasgow, who's from Plockton, so just up the road from you, and we had a good race. He's a much more practiced mountain biker than I am, but we came home second in the pairs. So for my first ever race, I was very happy with that.
That's brilliant. I believe Stephen and Nick came 7th, and it was out of about 120 competitors or so. So that's a good return.
In the pairs, yeah. I didn't know they came 7th. That's great to hear.
Yep.
Again, both of them are more roadies like me, road cyclists,
yes,
rather than mountain bikers. So to adapt to the off-road and such treacherous conditions, they did well.
Yeah, I think other than the temperature, I think they said it was a good adventure and they really enjoyed it. So Mark, the final question, and it's the obvious one I've got to ask, what's next?
Well, I'm enjoying sort of taking off my bucket list of some of the world's biggest endurance races. So, having always done expeditions, it's quite nice to go to the race side, and it's something I've never really done before. So, on my radar are things like Race Across America, the Cape Epic. These are some of the biggest road and endurance races in the world, and I'll be out there this year and next, taking on and hopefully winning some of them. So, keeping fit, still pushing it hard on the bike, and doing some daft stuff like racing my penny farthing.
Excellent, that all sounds good. So if anyone wants to follow you with these things, what's your website address and your Twitter, etc.?
So online it's markbeaumontonline.com, and Twitter is Mr. Mark Beaumont. I completed, as you were there, sort of an extensive Scottish tour last year, and I'll be down south throughout the summer doing sort of continuing that, doing a lot of theatre events. I think there's only 1 or 2 Scotland events happening this year, unfortunately, because we did so many last year. But yes, It's always good to get out and do those public events, and it was lovely to meet yourself when I came to the Corn Halls.
Yeah, so like I said, the next time you come, please give us a wee bit of warning in advance, and we'll get you on to promote it before this time instead of afterwards. Apologies for that. And I just want to wish you all the best for your future endeavours, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to go on to speak to us, Mark. I really, really appreciate it. You've got a fantastic story. I think the world record you've done, in my opinion, that's not going to be beaten.
Well, yes, I hope it will. I hope that records genuinely are there to be broken, so I'd love to see somebody contend it. But look, it's great to catch up. I enjoyed meeting you when I was over in Oban, and we'll definitely keep in touch for the next time.
Thanks very much, Mark. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers now. Bye now.